This video provides a brief background to the principles of biomedical ethics and focuses on applying those principles. Ethical choices, both minor and major, confront us every day in the delivery of healthcare for people with diverse values living in a pluralistic and multicultural society. In the face of such diversity, where can we find moral action guides when there's confusing or conflicting things about what ought to be done? Such guidelines would need to be broadly acceptable among religious and non-religious people across different cultures as well. Due to many variables that exist in the context of clinical cases, as well as the fact that healthcare includes several ethical principles that seem to be applicable in many situations. And these principles are not considered absolutes, but serve as powerful action guides in clinical medicine. Some of the principles of medical ethics have been used for centuries. For example, in the 4th century BC, Hippocrates, a philosopher and physician, directed physicians to help and do no harm. Similarly, considerations for respect for persons and for justice have been present in the development of societies from the earliest times. However, specifically in regards to ethical decisions in medicine, in 1979, Tom Beecham and James Childress published their first edition of Principles of Biomedical Ethics. This popularized the use of principlism, which is what we're going to be using in this class, in an effort to resolve ethical issues in clinical medicine. In that same year, 3 principles, including respect for persons, beneficence, and justice, were identified as guidelines for responsible research using human subjects in the Belmont Report. That was published in 1979. This report was generated in response to the atrocities of the Tuskegee syphilis study. In both clinical medicine and in scientific research, it is generally held that these principles can be applied. Even in unique circumstances, they can provide guidance in discovering our moral duties within that situation. So, how do we actually apply principles to a certain case? Intuitively, principles in current usage in healthcare ethics seem to be self-evident in value and have clear application. For example, the notion that a physician ought not to harm any patient is on its face convincing to the majority of people. Or the idea that the physician should develop a care plan designed to provide the most benefit to the patient in terms of other competing alternatives seems both rational and self-evident. Further, before implementing the medical care plan, it is now commonly accepted and legally required that patients must be given the opportunity to make an informed choice about his or her care. Finally, medical benefits should be dispensed fairly so that people with similar needs and in similar circumstances will be treated with fairness. An important concept in light of scarce resources such as solid organs, bone marrow, expensive diagnostics, procedures, and medications. The 4 principles of principlism, or principles of biomedical ethics as we tend to call them, are the principle of autonomy, the principle of non-maleficence, the principle of beneficence, and the principle of justice. The 4 principles referred to here are non-hierarchical. This means no one principle routinely trumps or outweighs another. One might argue that we are required to take all of the principles into account when they are applied to the clinical case under consideration. Yet, when 2 or more principles apply, we might find that they are in conflict. For example, consider a patient diagnosed with an acutely infected appendix. Our medical goal should be to provide the greatest benefit to the patient, an indication for immediate surgery. On the other hand, surgery and general anesthesia carry some small degree of risks to an otherwise healthy patient, and we are under an obligation not to harm the patient. Our rational calculus holds that the patient is in far greater danger from harm from a ruptured appendix if we do not act, than from the surgical procedure and anesthesia if we proceed quickly to surgery. Recall the readings on top-down ethical justification. Further, we're willing to put this working hypothesis to test in rational discourse, believing that other persons acting on a rational basis will agree with us. Recall our readings on bottom-up ethical justification. Thus, the weighing and balancing of potential risks and benefits becomes an essential component to the reasoning process in applying the principles. In other words, in the face of no other competing claims, we have a duty to uphold each of these principles, a prima facie duty. However, in the actual situation, we must balance the demands of these principles by determining which carries more weight in that particular case. Remember that prima facie duties are always binding unless they are in conflict with stronger or more stringent duties. A moral person's actual duty is determined by weighing and balancing all competing prima facie duties in any particular case. Since principles are empty of content and application of the principle comes into focus only through understanding the unique features and facts that provide the context for the case, we must be sure we always obtain relevant and accurate facts because they're the essential components that we need to apply these principles.